today we're talking about communication matters. So before we start, I'll just introduce a little bit more about me. I graduated from University of Houston in 2018 with a BS in chemistry and a minor in psychology. Right now, I currently work as a chemist in R&D for Sekisui Specialty Chemicals. And then a couple of months after starting my new job, I started doing web design for scientists, and that is now my business. And in the future, I hoping to be a grad student in material science and engineering next year. We'll see. And an entrepreneur, like social entrepreneur, academic entrepreneur, some type of entrepreneur in the future. So over the past 2 weeks, you've learned a lot, probably about the logic model, about designing for impact. So one of my questions for you is like, how has your idea transformed in the past 2 weeks after learning these two things? Over the past the two things that you've learned. So if you can share a little bit in the chat. Let me see. Anybody wants to share?
And Brittany.
Yeah, needs to have measurable impact. I guess, I mean, like has your, okay, you're just doing it, Gabriella says. Anybody else like to share? Realigning more with my target audience and scope has broadened from original to informative program. Yeah, you have capacity to reach a larger audience, and so you have to change mode of communication. Yeah, so like as you have dive deeper into like your idea, you see that it has really changed from where you thought it was coming from, right? And this is like normal. This happens to everybody. You start with one thing and then you kind of end up with something different. And so one thing that you may not recognize, but this idea is your offer, right? And your offer is anything that provides value. It could be free, it could be paid, and in order for this value to like be exchanged, you need someone on the other side, right? Somebody on the other side has to buy into this, and they have to engage with it, right? And so how do you get this person to engage with it? You have to help them understand the gap, right? And the way that you get them to understand that gap is to you have to get them to like buy into the story or your message or the problem that you're solving. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through a framework to help you clearly communicate your offer online and also build your online presence. So first, before we start, I want to kind of acknowledge some of the common objections that may come up when we talk about online presence, right? So online presence is like, having Twitter, writing a blog, pitching to podcasts and things like that. Really getting your name out there and becoming known for something. So some of the common objections you might have in the beginning is that like you are afraid to be like the face of the project, or you are intimidated by putting yourself out there in the online space. You don't know enough about your topic, or you think that creating an online presence is difficult or time consuming. And I think all of these things we have to acknowledge, these are just like limiting beliefs that we have like set for ourselves. And that in order to clearly communicate your message and yourself online, these are some mindset shifts that you need to make, right? So for example, as the person behind your project, you are already the founder. You are the person behind this idea, and that is like an identity that you need to kind of really just step into and then own that. And the other thing is just recognizing that your online presence, just like communication, is a tool for sharing your message. And you can just start by sharing what you know and sharing what you learn, and the things along the way. Nobody expects you to be like an expert in your field. And the last thing is that like building your online presence does not have to be something that is time consuming. You can do it in a way that fits your style and your schedule. So this framework that I created is called the 4D method, and it takes you from clarifying your offer to delivering the value to your audience. So first is defining your offer. We get really clear about what it is you are providing value on, who their target audience is, and what it is that they need to understand. Second is developing a system. And by system, what I mean is like creating kind of like a path for your audience from attracting them to converting them and getting them to your message and really engaging with your content. Third is designing your website. So your website is just a tool of communication. It's not the final product. Your final product is the offer itself, but a website will help that. And so that's why it's the third step. So once you have, defined your offer and understand how to get them to your website, and your website is just like an added bonus. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And lastly is delivering your content. So your content can be just like for some could be like research papers, it could be your program or a course, whatever it is that you are creating. How do you present that in a way to them so that they engage with it? So part of defining your offer, one of the biggest mistakes that people tend to make is that just you're only highlighting like the features or the solution, like the specs, right? Like that's the only thing you're focusing on. But actually, what people need in order to buy in is actually your mission and vision. And so I think you guys talked a little bit about this last week in designing for impact and doing something like outside of yourself. And so that is something we need to get really clear on before you can do the next steps. So like I mentioned earlier, it's really really kind of owning up to your role as like a founder and tapping into your personal brand. So for a lot of you, I think there's a reason why you created your idea, right? You have some personal story behind it. And I think it's really important for you to kind of understand and outline the story so that you can share this with others. And so it relates to what is your mission and vision for not just for your project, but like why are you doing this? What is your reasoning? What are your values, right? And in the logic model, you mentioned the major assumption, right? And so this is what you have to address before you can convert your audience to buy in. You have to address this gap, and that's where your content will lie. So in the case of your project, it's like, what about it is important to you, and like, why is that important to your audience? So you have to define like, who is your target audience and what matters to them. So your target audience, it could be grad students, right? But you kind of need to take it another level. You need to keep breaking it down until you get to like really niche. So for example, for me, I say I work with scientists, right? But I work with websites, and I want to work with scientists who want to create websites. But then I break it down even further. I want to help scientists who have like passion projects for their websites. And then with those passion projects, those scientists want to also like learn a specific skill set, which would be WordPress. So I get really like narrow down into like who my audience is. And so then now I know like what type of content to create around that. And then from there, once you know truly who your audience is, then you can narrow down your messaging. Like, you know exactly what type of questions they'll have, and that's where you can like give value to them. So relating back to what I just mentioned about your audience, your project or yourself, you have like a what would your tagline say, right? So who does your project help? How do you do it? And like, why do you do it? Or like, what is the impact of what you're doing? So maybe take like the next minute or two and kind of like write out your tagline, like, you know, my project or this project helps this audience do something so that there is like some result, if that makes sense. So maybe take the next minute or so and kind of write this down. And then
You want us putting these in the chat?
Yeah, you can put it in the chat. Yeah, that works too. You can share if you like. So I guess I will go first and then we can all share. So for me, the way that I see it is that I help scientists create websites easily so that they can share their science confidently. So I'm kind of targeting someone who feels, you know, they want to take it to the next level, they're a little unsure. So this is what I help their transformation. So of course, for me, it's a little bit different because I'm a service-based business, but for you, your project has some type of outcome as well. So anybody like to share? Actually, you could just unmute and share as well. You don't have to put it in the chat. So Rosario says, my project helps students understand scientific research and motivates them to learn more. Okay, maybe you can make it a little bit more specific, learn more about biology, learn more about scientists. It helps to be as specific as possible. Anybody else like to share? You can unmute. Okay, Sarah, I help parents cultivate lifelong learning in their kids without sacrificing time for themselves. That's good. Yeah.
I can share mine.
Okay.
My project aims to give folks better resources to understand the scope and problem of brain injury.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Now, I think one thing we could do with that is try to kind of make it more, what's the word? Like, imagine if you were to kind of pitch this to somebody, right? Like, you want it to be more, I would say, informal, not informal, but maybe there.
I know what you mean. Yeah, like with more layman terms.
Yeah, layman terms. Yeah. So that's something, and these things can change as our ideas change, or not our ideas, but like as we kind of learn more about our projects and things, these things can change, and so that's totally okay. Yeah. So Amrita says, help Indian researchers understand each other's work through simple talks and write-ups. Priscilla, my project empowers Latinx youth to pursue STEM careers by exposing them to positive role models, cultivating high expectations, strengthening their family and community support system. Yeah, so these are all good. So it sounds like you guys all have really clear idea of like who it is you're targeting, what you're doing, and why you're doing it, what it is for. Danielle. My project educates high school students about the neuroscience of mental wellness to help them become more resilient and inspire them to pursue careers in science. Okay, that's great. All right. So next part of your offer is validating your offer. And so remember back in the logic model, we talked a little bit about talking and listening to your users. And this is where it comes into play. For some, you can do market research, you can ask your audience questions, you could research, you know, online and things like that, see what people are looking for. But the important thing is to use the words that they are using, that your audience is using as well. So because in that way, your audience will feel like they're being listened to when you kind of mirror their words. And all these words will be used in your presentations, your websites, your pitches. These things are things that you need to kind of keep in mind when you present your idea. So next is developing your system. So your system is not just your website. It can be your website, but it's not just your website. But it's really about how you will attract people to your offer, to your project. And that includes using social media and building your online presence. So there were some resources in the curriculum, and I'm just going to share some screenshots from it. But I would recommend, if you haven't already, to take a look at them later. But first, these are two posts by Cheryl Theory, or Cheryl Lau at Cheryl Theory, and she is a online she's a brand and content entrepreneur, and she helps academics like really translate their research into the online space. And so one of the things she talks about in this post is about your content strategy and how to start your online presence. And so this is more like strategic type of things. And one of the things that you will need is two types of communication platforms. So for one is like a rich content, and one is a communication platform. And so a lot of us probably have like some type of communication platform, whether it's Instagram or Twitter. But one thing that is really needed is the rich content. So that would be like your YouTube, podcast, a blog, something where you can distill long form content and ideas all in one place. And then as for communication, that is where you share these ideas in bits and pieces, so that they can be attracted to the long form content. The second part is understanding where and how your ideal audience is at, and creating content to fit their needs. So do they prefer written, graphic, audio, or video content? Where are they already hanging out? So for example, for me, as a web designer, most likely if people are looking for how to do web design, probably video content would be the best form for me. And that means that YouTube would be where I would go to create long form content. And so for your projects, you have to consider like what is the best way of sharing your impact or sharing your message. For some, it could be like if you're doing interviews with people, it could be a podcast or it could be a YouTube. If you are doing a course, it would be like videos. So you could also do YouTube. And for some, it's like you're sharing research, articles, or things like that. So you need some type of like blogging platform, for example. So those are some things to keep in mind. Next is considering the themes in which your project is centered around. So these 3 to 5 themes are specific topics that are related to your project. So for example, for me as a web designer, it's like web design, starting a side hustle, and like academic entrepreneurship. Like those are like the 3 common things that I would talk about. So for you, maybe think about what are the 3 core ideas that all your content, all the things that you want to share your message about will center around. So anybody like to share maybe some of the 3 content pillars or themes that they have in mind for their projects?
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, okay. So do you want me to give an example from mine or for, okay. So for example, in my business, I always talk about, I don't just talk about like how to do web design, but I talk about like different platforms or, so like under the pillar of web design, the topics are like different platforms, why you need it, mistakes that people make when it comes to websites. And so having the theme helps you understand like what is important to focus on so that you're not kind of all over the place and trying to talk about different things. Did that answer your question, or would you like a different example? Yeah, so Sarah says science explanation, teaching and learning tips. And then the last one she's still figuring out. Yeah. And yeah, so you don't have to come up with all 3, or you can, it will grow as you, go along. But having like these general categories of things will help you come up with what type of things that like your audience is looking for. So, and for Rosario, in your case, just because I know your project, you have your research spotlight. So you kind of already have this laid out. You talk about the scientists, and then you talk about the research, and then another thing is you could talk about how to distill, complex papers or things like that. So like those could be like just some examples. Yeah, Priscilla says making science accessible and advocating for STEM fields. Yeah, and so just having these topics can help you see what your audience is looking for. Okay. And then I kind of covered this, your content topics, your personal story, what's the problem, why is it important? You could talk about lessons learned as founders of projects. Lessons learned is like a really great way to connect with people. Could talk about question, myths, or news about your field. You can talk about common topics about your project or in your field. So basically, one trick that I learned from Dr. Chris Cloney of the podcast Grad Blogger, he said that just take any textbook from your field or in your area, whatever you're researching, and whatever's like in the table of contents, those are like all your content topics, and those are things you can talk about. So for example, yeah, these are just like a starting point of things that you can talk about in terms of things you can talk about online to build your authority. Okay, next is designing your website. So before we talk about designing your website and everything, we want to talk about like what are your goals for your website, what does your website need, and what is your budget and all that, like all the technical details. So this is a chart that I created, and And it goes through the 4 platforms that I typically recommend to most people. And they range in terms of usability, price, and technical level. And so as people who are, creating your ideas, it's really a website. You need a website because you can have like a Twitter or an Instagram, but it's really not enough to share your message in whole. So that's where the website will come in. So here, I have you have different things that you can do with each of these platforms. Comparison of cost, technical level, customizations, and just an overall like summary. So what I typically recommend is like if your project is something where you just want to share, like a basic statement and maybe a couple of pictures or portfolio of some kind, something really simple, and you don't intend to update it too often, something like Google Sites can work. It's really inexpensive. It's free if you do it with like a free URL. If you choose to get like a URL for it, then it's like $7 to $10 to $12 a year. So that's like the super simple version. Then for other projects that require more organization, like you have more, like a lot of web text, like you want to write blogs, you want to share information in that way, would recommend maybe something like WordPress.com, because again, you get a free version, and it has more features than a Google site does. And then lastly, if you envision your website to, do a lot of things, like for example, you want to share a lot of video, podcasts, content, or you want, you have like specific layouts in mind that you want to do, maybe something like a self-hosted WordPress or Squarespace will be right for you. But there's just a bit of a learning curve there. So these are just some things that should consider. And if you are thinking about creating a website, feel free to reach out to me later on. I can help you out a little bit more with that. So what are some of the things that that you need on a website? So first, you obviously need your homepage. And your homepage should communicate that tagline that we talked about, really catch the reader's attention, and get them to stay on your website to learn more about you. Second is your about page. So your about page is your chance to really get them to buy into your message through your mission and your vision and your values. Then is your contact, and of course this is just to contact you if you have any questions. And lastly is your content pillars. So those themes that we talked about, that you want to feature, that you want to give more information about. So how do you design your website effectively? So number one is that for every page that you create, you want to make sure that you have a page goal and a call to action. And so that means that a call to action is similar. It's just like one of those buttons that you probably see a lot when you go shopping online, which is like buy now or add to cart. It tells the user what to do. And so in this case, for example, on your website, after you have your tagline, you can say like, this project, helps researchers get their science out there. And then your call to action would be like, learn how, and it would like lead them to more information about your process or your project. And so for everything you create on your website, there should always be some kind of purpose. There should not just be a page where it's just like a dead end. It should lead to some action that helps them convert and buy into your message. Second, or the third point is to write clearly and concisely in your voice. So with writing online, it's different than writing in grants or in papers and things like that. You want to write like in the way that you talk, and in a way that sounds like you, while also still communicating your message. And if you think about it, most people probably are on websites like through their phones or things like that. So you want to make sure that you write in a way where it's like scannable. They can get your main message without having to read too closely. As much as, you know, we love to go into details when writing, but when writing for the online space, you want to really just kind of hook them, give them the content, and then give them like the next steps. Like what can they do with that information? And then lastly is to collect all your content before you even open up your website. So all these things that you do, you want to plan before you even open up a website builder. Because if you just open up a website builder without having a plan, you'll end up with like blank page syndrome. You won't know what to do. So if you start from here, outline everything, collect all the photos you want, kind of like get an idea, sketch it out, see where things go. When it comes to creating your website, it will go a lot more smoothly. So here we have a screenshot of one of my clients. She gave me her permission to share this. This is her website before, and here, this is her homepage, and all she has on her homepage right now is her name. She has a couple of links at the top that just say home, about, blog, publication, CV, and then she has this kind of tagline, and then just her about page, paragraph, and then this thing on Twitter. And as you can see, you can't read the text, but it just tells you just about like her life and what she's doing, but I don't really get a sense of what it is she's trying to do with her website. And so after talking with her, I learned that she was a bird photographer. She really wanted to share her photography, share her writing about nature and birding, and do a lot more than what she could here. So this next slide show you what it looked like after. And this is kind of where, if you understand the goals, you can see that is reflected in the after. So this is what her website looks currently. Like I said, she's a bird photographer, and she really wanted to feature her photography on her website. And so this is how we incorporated it. And here you have her tagline here is environmental educator, aspiring ecologist, bird photographer. And so just already from that tagline, I kind of know these three things are really important to her. And then here's her little bio. So she says she's pursuing grad school to study bird conservation, and she likes to photograph birds and explore local parks. Then here is her call to action, which is like more about me. And then up here you can see that she has highlighted, instead of just like a blog, she's highlighted her research and like resources that she provides to others, to teachers and educators. And then here it's like a button that says print, which will lead to like her bird pictures. And then over here, she has more blog posts about birds and more pictures about birds. So as you can see from her website, it's very apparent that she really loves birds, conservation, and all those things. And so those are some of the things that if you are able to identify early on what's really important, you can find ways to highlight it like this on your website. Does anybody have any questions so far about this?
how would you approach like a personal website compared to like our project website? What would be, is there a difference?
Yeah, so I think for a personal website, you definitely want to highlight more like yourself, and then whereas the project website, you kind of take like a backseat. You would be like maybe a little bit farther down on the web page, for example. So here on her personal website, right next to it is like about her, right? But if this were a project website, here would be about your project, what your project does, who your project is about, where it's for. Actually, let me, if I can share another screen.
And that's a good question, because the formula is still the same. It's just
Yeah.
different.
Do you guys still, do you see a different screen now, or do you, I can't tell which screen is using.
We see the website, it says Rocket Women.
Yes, Rocket Women. Okay, yeah. So the Rocket Women is another website that I have worked on. They are a nonprofit organization helping women in aerospace. And so here they have this quote, and they're all about, you know, making women in space like visible to younger generations and outreach and things like that. And so again, like Fanuel said, it's very similar, but you highlight more about what is the goal of what is the mission and vision of that project. Yeah, and so here they have all their blog posts, and then they also seem to have a scholarship. So this was also highlighted. And so see here, there's like no mention of the founders or anything unless you go to like the about page. So then if you go to the about page, this is more about like about women in STEM. And then here's like more about their team. And then the founder has like her own page. And she talks about how she got into creating this project. And so this is kind of more of like what a project website could look like. Could provide resources, for example, show, you know, maybe a picture of it, a short description of the resources that you have, and things like that. So with websites, it's really important, you know, make it visual or to provide as much description as possible, but without going overboard. So for example, here she has this like 1 sentence or 2 sentence description about why this resource is useful. So those are things to consider. You always want to be able to communicate to the audience, like, why is it important? Why are you sharing this? Why should they use it or engage with it as well? Good question. Any other questions? Okay. So next is delivering your content. So the best way to build your online presence, whether it's for your project or for yourself, is to just continually articulate your thoughts through writing, presenting, speaking it through, and the more you talk about it, the more clear it becomes. And I think, and this just comes with practice. And you can do this in multiple ways. You can, you know, start with your long form content and break it down and repurpose this content across platforms. So that means, for example, if you have a really long blog post, you can break it down to like different tweets, different Instagram posts, or somehow, and get engagement in that way. The other thing is to not feel pressured to constantly create new things. So if you create a blog or something, YouTube channel, whatever, there's like some external pressure to always create something new. But sometimes you don't need to kind of buy into that pressure. It's just more about, are you communicating what your message is? Repeating yourself is okay. Things online tend to get like lost in the algorithm, so it's okay for you to repeat and just share more about yourself and your project. And the other thing is to find different angles. Maybe it can still be the same content, but you just kind of turn it a different way, people see it differently, and it sounds a little bit different. For example, I always talk about why people should use WordPress and not like Wix or Weebly. So I always say, like, you know, you can compare WordPress to Wix or WordPress to Weebly, or like why you should use WordPress, why you shouldn't use the other websites. So that's kind of what I mean by like finding different angles to your project. Then part of this is also gaining confidence. Just show up online consistently. You could host free webinars or workshops about whatever your project is, to get people on. That really helps like build authority and trust. You can pitch to podcasts or online publications. If you find a podcast that is, you know, reaches your ideal audience, send them an email. Be like, hey, I'd really love to share about this thing I'm doing. And that's like the fastest way to start building your authority online, finding someone else's audience and kind of getting it in there. And online publications is another great spot. There's a lot of like SciComm publications, websites, and things like that. Wherever it reaches your ideal audience, that's the publication you should pitch for. And so, you know, with pitching, always just, you know, show them how you provide value to their audience. And lastly, make friends online. Just connect with others authentically. Amplify others' messages. Connect with other people who, you know, share the same mission and vision, values that you do, and, you know, just uplift each other and engage with them by asking, responding questions, creating polls, and just like becoming more active. And from my personal experience, this is what has happened to me in like the past year. Just gotten really more active on Twitter and Instagram. I've actually gotten like a lot more opportunities through that. So that's why I would encourage all of you to kind of to step out of your comfort zone if you're not like a normally like online, you're not into the online space. But I think it's a really great personal development opportunity as well. Just within the past year, I've been featured on like 3 podcasts plus another one, and I was like invited to do something for ACS, and that was all just because like I show up online and I talk about this. And so like if it happened for me, it's very possible for you too as well. But the important thing is you have to share your story. You have to go out there and talk about what you're doing, and not just keep it hidden behind the scenes. You know, talk about being an SAI, what you've learned, what you're doing, and make something out of what you've done, and share your story, vision, and that's really it. And this links back to a video, which is also in that project curriculum spreadsheet. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend you watch it. Chris Doe is really an inspirational figure, and yeah, so I think you all are doing something really amazing, creating something from scratch, and you know, people need to hear about it. And so, you know, don't be afraid to share your message. And finally, just have some action steps for you. You kind of already did this, but write more about your tagline, and maybe start thinking about, for you personally, where you want to start sharing your message. Think more about your content pillars and topics. And then for fun, if you'd like, you know, start dipping your toes a little bit more in social media, maybe start your website. And then I guess I can send this to Nathaniel because it has all these links, but here's some more resources for like Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, podcasts, and then just some like people to follow about different topics. And these are all people in the academic space who have like kind of started creating their own businesses out of doing these things, and they have like great resources on all the different topics. And so this is not just applicable to like your project, but also to like your personal development as well. And then finally, these are some like final tools, additional tools for your online presence. And if you have any questions about these, you can always reach out to me, or you can ask me now, or whatever. So.
That was great, Brittany. Questions? Brittany is here with us. Please feel free to just unmute and ask away.
You kind of mentioned that you prefer things other than Weebly. Right now, I'm using Weebly. Is there a reason why you do not like Weebly? Is there something like bad with it?
So what I typically say to people is, like, if you already have a website on Wix or Weebly and you're happy with it, then just stick with it. But the reason why I personally don't like Weebly is because it doesn't have a lot of functionality. The blog's it's not as easily organized as WordPress, for example. WordPress has like the best content management system, so it means that like all your blog posts and things are like really easy to organize. Whereas on Weebly, Weebly is okay, but I wouldn't recommend it to people. But that's my personal opinion, right? So like if you're already on it and you're happy with it, then just stick with it, because moving around and stuff is not really worth your time. What you need is, if what you need is already fulfilled through that, then just stick with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I used to be on Wix, and God forget, I don't know how I was on Wix.
Wait, what are you on now? You're not on Wix, right?
Yeah, I don't know, WordPress.org now. So
Yes.
thankful.
Yeah. So that's what I typically recommend for people further down the line. But if you're just starting out, like a free WordPress.com is fine. And it's also great because whatever you create on WordPress.com, you can export later into like a WordPress.org. There's a lot that goes into that, and you can check out my Instagram. I talk about that stuff, or you can message me. We can talk about it as well.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a quick question. So you talked about gathering like your content and getting your goals all together before even starting and opening the website. So like all of us here, we're starting projects that are, like you said, from scratch. So would you suggest even getting a website started, even if the content may be like not so advanced or you don't have much of it? Is it better to have some sort of website versus waiting until maybe you have a little bit more to add to it?
Yeah, so actually I was just talking to one of my clients about this, and she mentioned like, oh, I don't have a lot of content up yet. I said, it's more important that you just put something up and launch it and let people know that it's happening. It is here, right? And then with your website, you can always add content later on. So long as you have, and you already have all these things, you know what your problem is, and you know what you're working towards, and your mission and your vision, I think that's already enough to create your website. And then you can just tell people, this is what I'm working on. It's coming, like keep a lookout, or like we are taking submissions, or, let it be known that you're creating something. It doesn't need to be finished, It's like a house, you see buildings built up all the time. You can't move in yet, but you're like, hey, I want to check that place out later. So that's what you're kind of doing as well when you create your website like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was thinking that. Thank you. Yeah, that's useful.
Yeah.
I love the analogy there.
I like to use a house analogy for some reason.
Yeah, it's a good one. Any other thoughts on this? So, the logic model, I hope you guys are appreciating how powerful it is, right? It sets you up to do all these things, thinking about pitching to potential investor, or even also creating websites, right? You already have all the components there, and it's a living document. It's not static. I would hope that you'll be looking at this every day. I look at my logic model, I think once a week. Okay, I'll repeat that. Once a week, I'm looking at it, tweaking it, okay? I'll talk to you guys. Like after this session, like Brittany has given me some new ideas. Okay, I need to change that. Like the tagline, for example, like I know mine kind of sucks. So I need to work on that, right? It's a continuous process that you want to iterate on. The logic model really gives you that framework, both professionally and also in your project base. To an earlier question about, your website, the formula is still the same. I really truly believe that the formula is the same. You just have to keep the pieces.
Yeah, and I think I agree. You guys already have all the pieces. You just need to lay out your website in a way where it's like very strategic so that people know where what is going. And then also focusing on the front end, which is getting people there. Because if you just create a website and you don't tell anybody, you know, that you have one, nobody would know. So you got to get people in the door, right? And the way you get people in the door is through your social media presence online. And that's just kind of how it goes nowadays. So
yeah, and as I mentioned before, get your analytics in there. And I know Brittany didn't get a chance to get into this, but the analytics, all these websites come with these features already, right. Google Analytics. Make sure you're looking at that. It's just, you want to know, like to Brittany's point earlier, talk to your users. It's one dimension of talking to them, but talking to them like talking to them. And I hope some of you have been talking to your users or potential people that you're going to be trying to help and impact, right? Ask them very basic questions like, hey, what do you think of this? Is there something I'm missing here? Use their words, as Brittany said, right? What are they saying, right? Just get their words. Don't have it all in your head. Like, yep, this is what they need.
Right. And from personal experience, as someone who created a product without doing market research, which if you're interested, it is the Google Site Guide. So if you're interested in making a Google site, have a PDF that you can download. I created that without consulting users, and it was like, oh, this is not really like a need. It's like a nice to have, but it's not like a need, right? So it was not something that was as like successful as I envisioned it to be. I mean, I made it successful in a different way, but this, again, that's kind of where it's important for you to like you see this problem, right? But other people may not even consider it to be a problem. So therefore it's not valuable to them. So in order to make it valuable to them, you have to have a solution that they want, and then address all those things. So
the need. Any other comments? I do have some closing words, but if anybody has any questions, I think your mentors this week, try to talk to them. If you have, I think start beginning to practice pitching your project both orally, and then that should translate to the website, because this is what, imagine you're not there, okay? How are you going to communicate this, right? And this is slowly, I hope you're getting the picture how this is building towards, like for funding, literally this is what you're doing. A funder is going to read your grant and you're not there, so you got to be able to communicate this. And most of the grants, they're not even that like, they don't have to be that fancy. It's just, you have to talk, just tell them what you're doing. What's the problem? And what are you doing about it? And how is your solution? Like, what data do you have that tells you this is the right thing? Right? And that's basically the premise of these grants. And as I'm reading these RFAs, these are requests for proposals, RFPs, they're just looking for that. Like, what is your idea? What's the problem? What's the idea? So please definitely try to now combine all these elements in your project as you're building. And my hope, and this is kind of a core thing of SCI Fellows program, is that these things become sustainable. Whatever you're building becomes sustainable, because it'd be I'd be sort of sad if we sort of do this and then a couple months in it's like gone and nothing ever comes of it. I would hope you're getting the tool set here to keep it going, right? There's a graveyard out there, massive graveyard, right, Brittany? Of stuff.
yeah, I think that's like the biggest struggle. But I think that you all have the ability to do it, because if you have the ability to create even this idea and to join this program, you definitely can make it something that is bigger. It's like it's not just like your small idea. Like, you can really make a really great impact with this, but you just have to let yourself see it. You got to step into that vision. And so, just think really big. And from personal experience, I didn't think that, I thought I would be doing something completely different like a year ago, and then now it's also completely different. So you never know where it goes. And if you guys ever want to talk to me as well, feel free to reach out. So
It's wonderful. Okay, so we have almost like a minute to go. So this week, talk communication, talk logic models, continue talking about professional development, sign up for Calendly. I see someone already did so earlier, yay. Well, I'd love to just catch up with you. We're gonna now slowly venture into operations and then funding, so very practical things. And then we're gonna get into case studies, right? Kind of go really hardcore. Here's a project, let's just take it apart. And I'm hoping you guys can use some of the skills to say like, that doesn't make sense. What's the tagline? Nope, that doesn't make sense. And then use that in your own projects, because at the end of this, November 14th, you guys are going to be pitching and demoing what you've been doing. And I'm excited to just see what all comes together. And so anyway, with Brittany, thank you so much. This was fantastic, very energetic. I'm inspired. And thank you to all of you, and have a good week. And we'll chat soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.